app or you on the bag?
I'm going to back.
All right. In that case, without further ado, I call upon the Prime Minister to propose the motion. This House would allow medical practitioners not to perform specific treatments or procedures for religious reasons. Hear, hear.
It's a bit weird because I have to look at you guys. Straight. Ready? Panel, the endless suffering of hell is one that far surpasses any minor inconvenience of a particular patient to cross into another state to undertake a particular medical operation. Even if the question here is the death or dangerous injury to a particular patient, we still feel that the endless suffering of hell is one that far outweighs it. 3 claims. 1, state should not make a value judgment in imposing this on doctors. 2, the burden on the doctor is one that far outweighs the burden on the patient. And 3, we do genuinely feel like even if you make this happen, doctors are going to mostly screw this up very badly for the patient and the consequences thereof. One point of model before we go on to my claims. Quite simply, we are going to make the modest claim that the government has a duty to provide an alternative to patients at the point at which the local doctor refuses to undertake, let's say, a blood transfusion or whatever the medical operation is in question. We realize and we will concede that this will not be the case in 100% of instances because government do not have infinite resources. We do, however, feel that any competent government liberal democracies will be able to provide sufficient alternatives. Funding to cross the state if you are poor, setting up other doctors, redistributing them. Often state healthcare has the ability to allocate doctors based on their religion, then we feel they should do so. So the question is not whether the patient gets the medical operation, the question is whether we should impose this on the doctors. Right, first claim then, state should not make value judgment. Note, ultimately, the state cannot say that death is worse than hell, because death is ultimately one piece of pain, which is inevitable as well, whereas hell is an endless piece of suffering that you have to go through, one that is not comparable or even imaginable. In that instance, when you impose this particular policy on doctors, what must the state say? They can say either that hell does not matter, or either that is the only way to trade off, that hell does not, in fact, exist. Note, what exactly is one of the 2 value judgments the state must make in order to impose this decision? The first is that your religion is not important. Why is this wrong? The state cannot tell you that your internal beliefs at the point at which they do not harm other people are wrong, because saying your religion is inconvenient or saying your religion is not important or in fact is incorrect is an attack not just on the religion, but on your identity, on your character, on your beliefs, on the set of moral framework that you have based your entire life on, that you and your family most likely preach, that you and your community most likely hold to. For the government, this is a complete, explicit, complicit attack on your religious beliefs that we feel is not one that they should principally be allowed to make, because the state cannot say what the correct value judgment or value framework is. The second moral judgment they can make is they can literally say that your religion is wrong. In that instance, we feel, 1, the state cannot say that to you because they cannot know, they cannot determine whether religion is correct or incorrect. But more importantly, even if we say that the religion is incorrect, i.e. Allah or God does not exist, we still say that it is up to the individual to determine what best moral framework determines the good outcome or the good quality of life for them. They are not allowed to be told by the state that you cannot believe in X set of things just because it is slightly inconvenient for one particular person who traveled an extra 100 miles for a blood transfusion. The best thing in this instance of the state to do is to say morally neutral, to say arbitrary and take a step back, to mitigate and in fact take care of all the harms that may accrue from this policy, but allow all individuals to practice their moral set of beliefs and actualize themselves in the way they see fit, because ultimately that is the duty of the state, to allow citizens to choose the best quality of life for them and to choose the best moral framework that they wish to live their lives by. Second claim, the burden on the doctor. Even if you buy none of our principles, here's where we come on to consequences, harms, and what the trade-off is. Ultimately, the trade-off you're going to get from opposition is one of bodily autonomy of most patients. Note, not death, because not the procedures we're talking about, blood transfusion or even abortion, is often not contingent. The harm of not going through those processes is not death. It is often just a case of bodily autonomy and being able to dictate what you want with your life. In that instance, the trade-off is bodily autonomy and all the subsequent harms they're going to tell you about the doctor undergoes. What does the doctor have to live with if you force him to do or her to do a blood transfusion? The fear of going to hell. Regardless of whether that happens or not, they think they're going to hell. What does that mean? One, this is really, really shit because it prevents normal functioning in life. You are scared to practice your own job now because you're scared of getting up in the morning and going to your office because you may have a patient who wants you to do something that forces you to go to hell. That is a pretty shit thing that you don't want to get up to. That is a strong psychological mental burden and often leads to depression in life. It also has a knock-on effect on everything else you do. Like any good thing you do is outweighed by the fact that you may have murdered someone. Note, we're not saying at all that abortion is equivalent to that. What we're saying is the doctor or a Muslim will probably feel like they have committed a murder. In that instance, to put that kind of moral burden on someone is immense. For them to wake up every single day of their life, go to their job saying, I may actually commit a murder and go to hell because of this. It makes it hard for them to buy into their community who are not doctors but still stick with that religious framework. It's harder for them to interact them. It creates considerable shame on these individuals, makes their lives incredibly shit. But no, secondly, we just don't think opposition can make this debate about abortion and blood transfusion. Electrotherapy for gay conversion is still legal in all, if not most, Western liberal democracies. If a parent wants a doctor to do that to their child, to convert their child from being a gay individual to straight, like giving them electrotherapy, the doctor should be allowed to say, fuck that, that is ridiculous. In that instance, you presumably, if you buy that, what you are essentially saying is a doctor, based on their own moral convictions, that someone's sexual identity is very important to them, should not be allowed to convert that. In that instance, if they can make that moral judgment and deny that treatment, we question opposition on making that consistent with a doctor saying they're not going to do a blood transfusion. Third thing, doctor screw it up. Is there a POI?
Yes.
No.
Clearly, any this kind of like crazy medical procedure falls out of the debate because the doctors are making the decisions based on medical information. Hence, they will in no case perform any sort of stuff on anyone's sexual identity, right?
Huh? I mean, it's legal. So parents demand it. They have to do it under your policy because doctors cannot say no to anything based on their moral beliefs. Right, doctor screw it up. Note, three things here. Firstly, even if the doctor is very good, like very passionate about the patients and wants to do this best way, they're one scared, nervous, divided attention of what they're doing. So they're likely to muck up the procedure anyways. But Stu, some doctors are just actively going to be malicious. They're going to be pissed off at you for forcing them to make a decision to trade off between earning a wage and supporting the family and possibly going to hell. In that instance, they may just be angry at the patient and be actively malicious. But third, note, we tell you that doctors will try their best to get out of it. Get out of doing the operation. What does that mean? That means telling the woman that shows up to your doorstep, to your office, that you should not commit, you should not undertake this abortion. That in fact what you're doing is possibly murder, is very bad. They will exaggerate the physiological harms and psychological harms of the operation as well. This means that even if the woman decides to undertake that abortion or the individual undertakes a blood transfusion, they have to live with a moral wreck, guilt at the end of the day of what they have done. On a comparative, you pass it on to another doctor, maybe travel an extra 20 miles to get to that doctor, but you still get it, a safe procedure with no moral guilt. On their side, you have both patients and doctors undergoing considerable harm. Proud to propose.
Thank the Prime Minister for that speech. I would like to ask everyone in the audience to whisper quietly when you're talking to your neighbor. It's hard, the acoustics in Zoom is not perfect. We really want to follow and hear everything that all the participants are saying. So with that, I'd like to call up the Leader of Opposition to oppose the fine speech we just heard.
Okay, so we on opposition believe that they have mischaracterized fundamentally what doctors are and what cases we're going to be talking about. We believe that yes, religion is important to a lot of people, but once you've made the choice to become a doctor and that choice is yours and requires long-term investment, A, you can't jump out of your responsibilities. B, we as a state cannot allow them to do so. More on that later. So first, a couple of points of rebuttal. First of all, the fact that states are supposed to be able to make decisions states cannot make decisions against people's religion. Yes, they can. They do it all the time. States make decisions against people's religion and moral judgment because, for one thing, they cannot always make a judgment that agrees with everybody. And Two, they do things like go to war. If on a battlefield you say, oh wait, I'm not going to kill that person in front of me, it's against my religious principles, note that in this case, going to hell is a lot more likely because you're killing somebody than if you're not giving them a blood transfusion. If you make that decision on a battlefield, you are the one who's going to be held accountable by the state, because in this case, in the case of Western liberal democracies, you were the one who put yourself there in the first place. No one really goes on conscription armies anymore. Secondly, the notion that people can always cross borders and go somewhere else if they actually need access to these procedures. Note that they have completely mischaracterized how easy it is. If I happen to be a teenage girl in Mississippi, I do not have a driver's license, there is only one abortion clinic in the entire state that I have legal access to. How easy is it for me to actually have access to the procedures I'm talking about? Because none of the doctors either will give it to me for quoted religious reasons, and because the state allows them to justify their choice by that. And I'll more on that in the rest of my speech. So what are we talking about here? Most doctors on their own will not put themselves in this position in the first place. That is going to be our main position, like one part of our position on opposition here. It requires a lot of work and investment to become a doctor. A lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort, and most of the incentive that gets them through this is not any like money they would make at the end, because doctors do not, except in a few exceptions, doctors don't make astronomical amounts of money, especially compared to the 10 years of study they had to go through med school. So most of them are motivated by the ability to be in a case where they can actually help people, which means that they do not want to be in a position where they're confronted with a patient who is asking them for something and then saying, like, not being able to give the treatment to that patient. Doctors also happen to be a long-term investment by the state. In many cases, the government is responsible for part of or all of their education. Therefore, because they end up owing something to the state is also in charge of setting up the medical force, basically. So when they go through this procedure of the 10 years it takes to become a doctor, at some point they do get to make choices in what fields they specialize in. Okay, once the choice is made, if you choose to work with, say, pregnant women, then no, you're not going to be able to back out of abortion if abortion is necessary. And you know that going into the field because you've been told about this, you've been given medical information on these procedures during your studies. You are going into this with full knowledge of what cases you are going into. And we say that the burden is therefore on them to accept the fact that they have made this decision. So religion is important, yes, if people are afraid to go to hell, that's fine, but that's not as important for us as it is for us as a state than the harms that end up becoming twofold here. Sorry. So as I was saying, there are two basic types of procedures that this is going to influence. There are procedures that are essentially urgent and non-urgent. So in the urgent case, like cases where we're talking about blood transfusions, note that if someone refuses to give a blood transfusion, yes, in a lot of cases, people are going to die. If you're in an emergency room, for example, where an emergency team happens to be limited on that day, say doctors need to sleep because they've been on a 36-hour shift and the emergency room is suddenly understaffed, we cannot run the risk of only having one or two doctors taking care of all the people going into the emergency room, and having some of those doctors have a quandary whenever someone requires an urgent procedure. So think about the case here. We're also making this easier on the doctors. There are two worlds we're looking at here. Patient comes into the emergency room, requires in dire need of some sort of treatment, right? So we basically force them to do it. We say, as a state, if you do not do this, you will lose your medical license and therefore will no longer become a doctor. They make the trade-off of, okay, I will do this procedure, even if it's against my beliefs, in the hope of being able to help more people in the future, which we believe that they, as rational people, will see as the long-term benefit in the situation, versus we allow them to choose, which A, means that they will not necessarily help the patient, but B, they will also be more tortured by the choice that they will have to make, because we are allowing them a choice that leaves them in more of a position to see that, what did they do? They, A, took an oath to help this patient and not let any harm come to that patient, but B, their religion tells them that no, they can't do it. So if you believe in the oath and you believe in the religion, that sort of balance, we believe that sort of balances out. But if we as a state come in and say, hey, you have to do this, then that tips the scales against them and also makes the choice easier on them. Yes?
Would you compel doctors to euthanize a patient, i.e. literally kill them?
I could not compel the state to kill somebody. I can compel the state to do it if the patient asks them to, yes. So, because we as government essentially are responsible for healthcare, we cannot allow an urgent situation to go unnoticed. Unurgent situations, though, non-urgent procedures are the next thing. So, going back to the training that it takes to become a doctor, right? I would like to reinforce the fact that doctors at some point in their careers made a choice about what type of field they're going to go into. If the field has something around euthanization, if they wanted to go into, say, anesthesia, we could say, hey, that's going to be a mandatory part of your training. You know that you are going to be confronted with this situation. If you do not like it, go the heck out of the school, because there are another 100 people ready to take your place. Medicine is not lacking for demand in Western liberal democracies as far as students go. So we believe that we're not going to like suddenly lose all doctors because they're not going to like this. So okay, so again, this also goes for abortion. We are not putting them in, like, sorry. When we make this type of decision, okay, we also allow one final thing, which is essentially giving another route to all the rhetoric that is against this type of thing that does not only have to do with religious reasons, right? So whether we're talking about abortion or gay conversion, in both cases, like, for one thing, the patient is asking for the procedure, not the parents, and the doctor is supposed to take into account what's best for the patient. They've taken an oath to do what's best for the patient, and they're not going to be actively malicious, because many of them wouldn't have gotten into medicine in the first place. So they're actively malicious. Anyway, very proud to oppose the motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your opposition for that speech. We call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case that stands in the Prime Minister's name. We thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech. We call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition to round up the first half of this debate. Here.
Panel, it is unclear what kind of doctors we're talking about in this debate. Because we've just seen the government speaker stand up and tell us, well, you know, Jehovah's Witnesses won't ever have to make the decision to violate their religion. We've just seen him basically say that no doctor who thinks abortion is immoral will ever have to perform an abortion. So our question then is, if doctors are never put in this situation in the first place, because as Ian explained to you, they don't want to be put in this situation in the first place because it's really shitty to have to subtly coerce someone into giving up abortions, right? If they will never want to be put in this situation, what kind of doctors are we trying to prevent from exerting their free right of religious expression, right? This has never been clearly defined on the government bench, which leads me to the biggest problem in the first half of this debate. The biggest problem is that on the gov bench, we've had all those harms flowing from the idea and the notion of hell. We wholeheartedly concede that if you're a religious person and you believe in the existence of hell, and you believe that some actions will lead you to eternal suffering and eventually, you know, not being in paradise with the family that you want to be, it is the biggest harm there is. However, since the speaker has just conceded that those doctors will never be put in a situation in the first place where they will have to make that decision, they've essentially washed their case. So we're going to prop up their case, make it slightly better, and rebut that case, right? So the first thing we want to say is, on the notion of whether or not those doctors will have to make that decision, given that there was no response on whether or not a doctor will choose at 18, and basically this is a mischaracterization on their side, right? A doctor needs to choose at 18 to be someone who performs abortion. At 20, he needs to do an internship in a hospital to perform abortion. At 21, he performs his first abortions. At 24, he chooses to keep his specialization. At 26, he says, I will not perform abortions because it's against my religious freedom. We tell you the state has taken a gamble with this doctor. By choosing to train this doctor, by choosing to invest in this doctor, it has chosen to allocate resources that it could have allocated to other doctors. It has chosen to make sure the public will receive abortions from this specific doctor, right? As such, when this doctor at 26, after all the opportunities it had to make sure that it opts out of this choice of career he made, right? After all of those opportunities, the state is put in a situation where no, the investment of resources, the binding contract that you have made with the state is so that you need to carry out. So the response to this is, well, you cannot be bound by a decision you make, even if you make it multiple times, even if you made it after having performed the surgery once or twice, because basically, you know, if you're an extremely religious person, the abortions that you perform at 22 are basically like your teenager phase, right? We heavily contest that characterization on their side. The first thing we tell them is, look, are bound by the oath that they make. They are bound by the oath that they make, because the oath that they make is truly binding until they end their profession. It is truly binding that they have to help their patients to the point that everything that is asked for them, that is legal and that helps the patient's health, needs to be performed by the doctor. This oath is binding until they stop working. Doctors are unlike regular professionals, right? Since they have this binding oath that we need to make sure that they keep respecting, they need to make that decision and they need to stick by it. We cannot simply give them the option to opt out because, one, as Ian explained to you, this means that the state, when it allocates resources, will not allocate them in the best ways possible, and therefore needs to make sure that, you know, a doctor will not simply opt out of the emergency team that he's in because he doesn't feel like the surgeries that he has been trained for years for, that he's accepted to do several times, now it's suddenly against his religion. But even if you buy their characterization, right? Even if you believe that doctors will do this, doctors still have the option to choose another specialization. right? If you're someone who specializes in a specific type of surgeries, you can always become a doctor in another non-heavily specialized profession, i.e. you can become a general doctor when you don't have to do anything that you perceive to be against your religion. You can become a private doctor where your religion is up to you to decide what kind of things you do. We tell you all of those things are possible, all of those alternatives are present to the doctors. However, it is not clear why the state should be the one to provide the alternatives instead of the doctors choosing to be the alternatives themselves. Which leads me to the second mischaracterization, the framing that they provide you. They tell you in those countries it is simple for patients. We tell you that one, to the point where they present you with examples such as gay therapy by reading, right? We tell you that countries where abortion clinics are very few in specific states, it is very difficult, as Ayun pointed out, to simply try to go to another abortion clinic. But we tell you, even in better cases for them, right? Even if you have several clinics in the same area that you live in, even if it just means 20 kilometers, as a woman, particularly unstable, because I just have to make a big decision about my body and the rest of my life, and I go to an abortion clinic, and I have someone subtly trying to tell me not to make an abortion, or just flat out telling me I will not do this because it's against my religious belief. Not only does this convey the message that that person believes that you're committing murder, and that if he were to do this for you, he would go to hell, hence you also go to hell according to his religion, right? The psychological impact of receiving that from a state-condemned professional means that when you go to the other clinic, it's not just the fact that you have got to go to the other clinic, right? There has been something more added to the fact that the psychological harm is harder on their side, right? So they also have to deal with this. Look, our case is very simple. Doctors are like any other professionals. They've made a binding contract, which they have had multiple times the option to opt out to. They still have the options to opt out, right? They still have the options of becoming private doctors. The problem on their side is they don't understand that the alternative is easier on the doctors to do, and that to the point where those doctors have chosen to sign the contract, the state has the right to ask them to fulfill that contract, especially since they have the right to opt out. The state can tell them, and we're perfectly fine with this, if you don't want to perform this surgery, get the hell out and we'll hire someone else who's willing to do so. You can become a private surgeon if you believe that it's the best way to practice your religion, right? So, why do we win this debate against opening government? Opening government gives you this whole characterization about all the harms that come to people who believe that they will go to hell if they perform surgeries. What we'll tell you is that those harms exist. But the thing is, they have the option to choose to do something else. They're not bound to their word. Iron has given you all of those things, right? The fact that they take the place from someone else, the fact that they have the option to opt out of their careers, and the harms on the patients are so huge compared to the harms on the doctors that we're perfectly fine with telling them to become private doctors. Try to oppose.
We thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for that speech. We call upon the Member of Government to extend the government case.
All right, so what a closing government will bring you in this debate is a very important shift from the focus we saw in the first half, which was mainly about the incredibly important harms on doctors we already saw from OG, and then some rebuttal from the opposition concerning the effects we have on patients and the actual choices doctors have. But what CG will focus upon in this debate, what we think is far more important because of the incredible size of the group affected and also the long-term consequences, is the actual patients that will be affected by this decision to let religious doctors choose which procedures they can actually perform under their religious conscience, right? So first of all, I will bring some of our own substantive, and lastly, I will rebuttal some of the points made by the opposition. So first of all, what we see is that when we are forcing doctors to be people who are okay with every single controversial treatment that might be applied in their chosen field, whether as a general practitioner, this is also the case, because what we see is that, and as a general doctor, what we see is that they have to make this choice to actually offer this treatment to patients and actually perform it a lot of the times. You're out of order. What we see is that by forcing only those kinds of doctors to exist, by essentially eliminating all religious doctors to be able to partition in this special field, we are creating less incentive and essentially eliminating in the long term, as I will explain further on, the ability of religious people to go to their doctor and actually have an incentive to do so. How does this work? What we see today is that religious people are often viewed as a problem by the medical community in the sense that they cannot offer them the treatments which are logical and scientific and liberal. What we see is that by forcing this measure to, by enacting this motion, we are enabling religious people to continue to be doctors and preventing the adverse selection of people who are more and more liberal as more and more controversial treatments come out. What we need is this motion to be able to ensure that religious patients have doctors which actually match their convictions and are able to discuss with them actual options that lie within the possibility of their religion. How does this work? For example, when we have a Catholic doctor which doesn't feel that abortion matches his faith, and we have a Catholic woman or girl which is pregnant and is worried about this, instead of seeing a doctor which always offers the most controversial treatments because that's the one he feels is best, we have doctors that can actually relate to the patient, which enables a trust relationship between the patient and doctor, which we value as very important to enable the best medical care. And without enacting this motion, and as we move towards more controversial treatments, as we've seen thinking about things like DNA selection in babies and other more controversial treatments, as we move towards the future, we will create more adverse selection towards people which have which enable all controversial of religious people who might be who have a more selective way of thinking about this. Now, what else does it mean? When we look at the happiness of the patients themselves, instead of just the incentive to actually go to the doctor because they have faith that the doctor will offer them an alternative that lies within religion, when we look at the happiness of the patient themselves, we see that both the trust they have in their doctor to be someone they can to be someone that will work with them within the boundaries of their religion and actually offer an alternative, which we can offer an alternative which works within their religion, and actually have faith that their doctor is completely conscious and will always, even if they're unconscious. For example, if you take the case of Jehovah's Witnesses, even though it was effectively ruled OG, if we take their example of doctors being Jehovah's Witnesses and the patient being one as well, they can have faith that the doctor won't perform a blood transfusion once the patient is unconscious, simply out of this medical duty that the opposition has constantly talked about and the Hippocratic Oath, because they feel it is against their religious purposes. Therefore, we think it's very important that these patients have the ability to go to a doctor they can actually trust, to have respect for their religion. We also see that currently, and that's the thing that the opposition is actually reinforcing, as was already mentioned by OG, this trend towards more liberal views on what treatments are actually acceptable as a medical alternative. We see that the development of alternatives to these treatments is actually lacking, and that's what we think is a very wrong progression, as we see that if we enact a motion, there will be more incentive to provide alternatives to those people that are not okay with a certain type of treatment. We want to ensure that people can have a treatment even if they're against it, if their religion is against it. And by enabling religious doctors to actually have a role in our medical profession, we can be sure that these alternatives will be more provided, as there's more incentive from both patients in that sense, but doctors themselves as well, to actually develop these alternatives. Right. Some points of rebuttal. They had a point about the fact that doctors would have more incentive to actually perform these procedures if they knew that they would lose their medical license if they didn't if they didn't perform certain procedures, even though they were against their religious regions. What we already got from OG in the sense is that this is a very wrong motivation that will actually cause more harm in the way they treat patients. But far more importantly, what we see is that this will actually create more voice selection, as you're selecting doctors that care so much about their medical license in the sense of keeping their jobs, that you're essentially eliminating those people who have strong enough moral standards to actually have conviction in the sense that a certain controversial treatment might be wrong. So what you're essentially doing, especially as we move towards more and more controversial treatments in the future, when it comes to DNA treatment, when it comes to other forms of controversial procedures, you're essentially adversely selecting only those doctors willing to agree to any controversial treatment enacting it, which means that you're selecting a group of doctors that is very small, that is willing to provide any controversial treatment, and is therefore less convicted of their own morals, as they are apparently willing to trade any of them away simply to not lose their medical license. Therefore, I think it's very important that we enact this procedure, that we enact this motion, so we actually have doctors that are willing to sacrifice their medical license, their job, just because of that they believe in, and that their convictions in important moral standards that a doctor should have, instead of just being a clinical computer which makes a decision purely based on the medical ethics instead of taking the ethics as a whole into account. So what we see is that if we focus,
Okay, what religious patient would go to a doctor of the same religion and ask for a treatment that is against that religion?
That's exactly our point. what you have stated is that we need to have the patients adjusted to doctors, and by eliminating doctors with a certain religious conviction, you're essentially eliminating doctors' ability to really relate to the patient, as the only doctors that will still exist are those with incredible liberal scientific conviction, as will happen under the case of opposition. So what we need is a doctor who can actually respect the patient's religious. We actually have a great deal of relation to the patient's religious understanding. So what you get from CG is the fact that if we focus on the patients, as the opposition has clearly made their biggest priority, we can see in the long term it will cause the religious patient will have more incentive to go to the doctor if there's more religious doctors that actually respect that actually have a great deal of relation to the religious choices. The patient's happiness will improve because they have more trust in these doctors than they have in doctors which offer them any scientific or controversial treatment. And in the long term, we also get more advancement of alternatives to these controversial treatments, so that even religious people can get the best medical care which they deserve under our state. Thank you. Please vote proposition.
We thank the member of government for that speech. We call upon the member of opposition to extend the opposition case.
Honorable Speaker, we believe that the choice under your religion is not that straightforward. We believe that there are actually religious people who actively make the choice to carry out these operations. We believe that under this motion, we are actually exerting pressure from religious groups in the society towards these practitioners who are willing to undertake these procedures, and we will actively stop them from doing so and cause a great harm to the access to these given procedures. In my speech, I'm first going to a little bit push back on the idea of everyone ending up in hell if they undertake these procedures, and show to you how the religious choice is actually not so straightforward. Then I'm going to touch the extension of the side government and tell you why there will still be religious doctors, and why actually there's still information about how the religion views the medical staff to be like, even under the side opposition. Then I'm going to tell to you why it's actually a constant choice for the doctors to undertake these operations in any case, and why the general practitioner and so forth will not be doing it. And finally, I'm going to extend to the idea of the access and show to you how we actually pressure the less religious people who actually are willing to undertake these procedures not to do them in, say, Catholic countries. So on the idea of the side government, where you're telling us that these doctors will end up in hell and will greatly suffer in the Prime Minister's speech, this is what we basically get from the opening. We say that under most majority of religions, helping out people is also something that's considered morally good. We say that especially in like Islam and in Christianity, there is like a balance between disturbing the life of somebody with these procedures, and on the other hand, helping them. It is not a moral imperative for these people not to do them. We see that there are numerous religious peoples, no thank you, who still decide to undertake them. Who decide that there is greater benefit from their religious moral perspective to actually help people, to do the utmost best for people, and not take or not only stop from say making abortions or so forth. What we see is that this is a balance. The different religious groups view differently, and different people within the same religious groups view differently. And there are very likely to be people of very high religious belief who still see that it's perfectly possible for them to undertake these things without any moral issue. Hence, they don't really all suffer from these great emotional issues that the opening is telling to you. This is very important for the later extension. But for that, on the extension of the government. Basically, you tell us that the doctor will be unable to relate to the patient in a scenario where they are where the doctors are all of no thank you, where the doctors are all of high liberal standard. First of all, we believe that there are plenty of liberal religious groups already who have high incentives to their religious beliefs to provide their religious followers with information about how the religion sees medical practices. We believe that the Catholic groups do know under any case what their religion thinks about medical stuff, because this is stuff that the religion is pushing in you. Furthermore, we believe that the local GP of yours, under no circumstances, usually carries out abortions, nor does any sort of other questionable procedures, because they just mostly give health advice and so on. We believe that this kind of doctor will be there. They are able to follow whatever religion they are, and this debate really doesn't touch these groups. What this debate actually touches is the groups of experts who are sort of like carrying out the actual stuff. We say that we believe that there is really no difference also in the development of the alternatives, because currently the incentives for developing alternative treatments that are morally better from the point of view of religion are there already, due to the fact that considerable amount of funding comes from like major religious foundations in US and so forth into this alternative treatment development. And the fact that we are deciding to sacrifice the ability for people to get an abortion when they actually need it, to push for a minor bit of more incentive, is not really a good one. So on then the extension into the field of the first reiterating actually on the choice. So as brought to you by the opening opposition, we see that people make a choice to actually go into the specialized field where they have to undertake these operations. Know that even blood transfer is not something that all doctors would have to do on a regular basis. This is also a hospital procedure. If you become a GP, you can still become a Catholic GP without performing an abortion and so forth. There is no issue in this field. Note that due to how the market for doctors works, you're able to actually return to the position of GP very quickly at any stage. Hence, you're not really forced to undertake these operations if you're not gone there. And this is vitally important. We see that in the Catholic, this is the extension. We see that in the Catholic world, especially in the Catholic world, but also in other places, there are numerous doctors who are deeply religious, but who have made still the conscious choice that they believe it is morally better for them under their own religion to practice the abortions and practice euthanasia and so forth, if that's legal, then no thank you, then actually not do them. We see that these people are religious, but they have made their own moral choice. We see that these are the people who provide the access to this kind of procedure that we have already heard from the opening are very, very important to people in these areas. We see that when we actually make it when we give them a chance not just to opt out. So in other words, we take away the chance of them telling to the community that we do these operations only because we are forced to. Because currently they tell the community that they are forced to undertake these procedures, right? The sort of moral standing or the moral reason why they're able to do them, and then the reason they give towards the community of theirs and towards the religious group of theirs is that they're able to say that the government is forcing us to undertake these procedures, right? The government is they're able to say that the government is able to forcing them to carry out abortions and so forth. When they no longer can say this, from the perspective of the community and from the perspective of the religious groups, this becomes an active moral choice. No, thank you. We see that currently it is obviously an active moral choice they have made themselves. They have decided to carry out the abortion, but they are able to defend themselves. They're able to continue doing this only because they're able to tell the society and the religious groups that this is like an imperative put on them by the government and not by their own moral choice. So once they're no longer able to do this, what will happen is that the conservative groups conservative groups in say southern Italy, conservative groups in Southern America and so forth, but people from the church, people from the society, and God knows mafia and so forth, will start exerting pressure on these doctors for carrying out this. They no longer can say we do sin only because we are forced to do sin. They have to say we do sin because it's a moral choice of ours. This greatly limits their possibility to offer these abortions. This greatly limits the access of the women in these areas to abortions. This greatly limits the access of people to blood transfer if this is an issue. It greatly limits the access of people to euthanasia, and this we see are things that people should have an access on. We say that this will turn entire large communities where the majority of the people are following certain religious group into places where you will no longer have any sort of access to these procedures. It will turn not only that you have the one doctor in Mississippi who performs the abortion, but it will turn into a situation where in Southern America there really are no doctors because of the pressure that the organized religion is able to exert on these people, the way how they are able to push these people out of the religious community, out of the society, by saying that now you're doing active sin, you're no longer forced by the government to do the sin. And this is the difference. This is where the impact is, because this destroys the access to abortion in general in half of the world, and that compares very heavily against the small impact on the few doctors who are sort of forced to do this under the OG model. Thank you.
We thank the member of opposition for that speech. We call upon the government whip to summarize the government side.
One second. So, ladies and gentlemen, in my speech, I'll first go through some points of rebuttal, and in the second half of my speech, I'll sum up this debate and explain why we believe, as the government, we have taken over in the long term the benefits of the motion. So, first, let's look at how are we improving the relation between the doctor and generally the trust, which is like having the further impacts later on how our patients going to visit doctors and how our doctors going to be incentivized to actually exercise their profession. So first of all, one rebuttal we've heard is that religious groups already provide the information. We do not believe this is the case. We believe this is a weird claim. We do not believe that people necessarily, when they have a certain faith and they do believe that faith, they go to their church to consult of what they should do and how they should do it. They prefer going to the doctor because they have certain trust that the doctor has the better expertise, but at the same time, they are not sure whether the doctor actually is going to able to provide them also with the moral ground, which is currently not happening. Therefore, we do not believe that religious groups do provide an alternative in the status quo. Secondly, that the GPs do not need to carry out these decisions, that they do not need to make them. We see that in the vast amount of Western liberal democracies, the GPs are actually one of the biggest categories to which this motion applies. GPs are the people to whom, if a patient or if anyone in the society has a problem, they first need to go to their general practitioner, who gives them advice, who consults them, and who later actually tells them where to go get the expertise or special treatment or something. But in a lot of cases, these GPs already need to provide some sort of immediate treatment. So we believe the general practitioners are the biggest group to which this motion applies because they're the ones who make the moral judgment and who make the moral decision and do give their subjective opinion to the patient of what is best for them and where they should go to help. So therefore, we believe that if we consider the decision-making of a patient and the decision-making of the doctor, this is the biggest group to which this actually goes for. And therefore, to the experts, we believe, yes, it should apply also to them, but we believe, but it's more relevant to the doctors because they're in immediate touch with the general population and their profession is more subjective and more oriented in the broad general range of all the possible treatments that they can offer to the patient. So, but let's look at whether the alternatives there are in the status quo. Therefore, also, the claim that the religious groups are already funding the alternatives, we do not believe this. We believe, and even if it is happening in the status quo, it is not sufficient because the general public is not actually looking for these alternatives because they have this sort of detachment that medicine is really detached from their beliefs and they need to always decide when they go to a doctor whether it's contradictory or not. So therefore, we believe that if we enact this motion, the general medical community is going to orientate also more on division of the moral grounds and providing alternative on various moral grounds. Therefore, we believe that there is going to be a lot more significant pressure to actually develop treatments and alternatives for the future to solve various amounts of problems. Secondly, whether it is a conscious choice that the doctors are making, we have heard a lot of rebuttal from the opening government, and I would also like to stress out the extension we have brought, that we see within the last 10 years how much controversial have the medical ethics gotten and how much liberal they have gotten. We believe that, first of all, general practitioners or generally doctors who did sign up for their job 10 years ago or 20 years ago, everything, had no idea that it will face the challenges they're facing nowadays and never gave the consent to actually tackle these kinds of moral decisions, such as abortion, such as gender transfer, and similarly. But the same applies to the current people studying medicine right now. They do not know what kind of obligation is going to be put on them within 20 years, maybe even 50 years. Therefore, we believe that this motion is the only solution to actually make this moral ground more sustainable. Moreover, that Catholic doctors can become general practitioners. Well, firstly, yes, they can, but they're being biased if they're exercising their religion. But moreover, the current status quo is excluding a lot of religious minorities from actually exercising this. If we look at the groups of Jehovah's Witnesses, no Jehovah's Witness is ever going to study medicine to provide treatment for his group of religious minority, because during the exercising of his expertise, he's already going to have to do something which is immoral towards them, such as blood transfer. However, what do we see if we do enact the motion? We're going to involve more minority religious groups or more extreme religious groups to actually do study medicine with the alternatives provided for their own particular religious field, and they're going to enact these policies, and therefore we will see that more these kinds of religious groups are going to go to the doctors. Also, that there are going to be more doctors providing them the treatment, and generally the bond and trust towards the medical system is going to establish. But let's look now at the extension of the opposition. I'll sit with you.
Thank you so much. Clearly, if these doctors are now, the Jehovah's doctors and so forth, are very restricting what they can actually do, and the Jehovah's end up using these doctors only, the kind of medical care the Jehovah's gets decreased, in quality, because the treatments are not available
Yes,
to them
I
like they would be in
understand.
public hospital.
But comparatively to the status quo, we see that a lot of these kinds of religious groups do not even go there, because they do see that whatever these doctors are offering them is not having the moral judgment that they believe in. Yes, if they have a minor issue, they go to a doctor. But if they're actually exercising some serious problem where they see that the only solution the doctor is going to offer them is going to be something against their beliefs, or they do not unite with the beliefs of their doctor, and they see that the advice the doctor is giving them is against their beliefs, they're not going to go there again, because they're going to be deterred from this controversy and from their evaluation of what matters to them versus what does not. But thirdly, is there going to be a pressure from religious groups to attend these doctors? Maybe. We believe that there is a big division in society concerning who are moderate religious people, who are extreme religious people, and who are not. We believe the current pressure already exists when it comes to the more radical religions, and therefore they're already excluded from actually attending these scientific practices, which is not going to happen in the future if we provide them with this alternative, and this alternative branding of doctors. Yes, this is Jehovah's Witness doctor, so go to him, make sure that he's ensuring this. But moreover, why are we going to open doors for better policies? It's because for more open environment towards medicine, because currently people are not counter liberal ethics or counter controversial politics, because they believe it's becoming way too liberal. However, if we make it if we enact this motion, people are going to see that their moral grounds are still being upheld. Therefore, they are not going to mind something which they consider controversial to happen. Therefore, we did bring you the situation of how this in long term is going to affect the society, why people will go more to doctors, why the relationship will be better, and why doctors are going to be generally happier, generally more tending to go there, and feeling more moral when they're fulfilling their profession. Thank you.
We thank the opposition for that.